Dear students, welcome to Introduction to Anthropology. Today we'll be discussing politics and power. We will be covering what is the political, band and tribes, chiefdoms, state systems, social control. What is the political? Political organization comprises those portions of social organization that specifically relate to the individual or group that manage the affair of public policy or seek to control the appointment or activities of those individual or group. Political regulations include such processes as decision making, dispute management, and conflict resolution. The study of political regulation draws our attention to those make decisions and resolve conflicts. The Anthropologist Element Service listed four types or levels of political organizations. Those are band, tribe, chiefdom, and state. None of the first three types can be studied as a self-contained form of political organization because all now exist within nation state and are subject to state control. We'll be discussing bands and tribes first. A band is a small kin-based group. All its members are related by kinship or marriage, found among foragers. Tribes have economies based on horticulture and pastoralism. Living in villages and organized into kin groups based on common descent, clan and lineage, tribes have no formal government and no reliable means of enforcing political decisions. Foraging bands. Modern hunters and gatherers today are remnant of foraging band societies. Modern foragers live in nation state and are interlinked world. All foragers now trade with food producers. For example, San speakers or Bushmen of Southern Africa have been influenced by Bantu speakers, farmers, and herders for 2,000 years and by European for centuries, and emerged as rural underclass. Within this system, many San now tend cattle for wealthier Bantus rather than foraging independently. San also have their own domesticated animals, further illustrating their movement away from foraging lifestyle. Tribal cultivators. Like foragers, horticulturists tend to be egalitarian, although some have marked gender stratification, an unequal distribution of resources, power, prestige, and personal freedom between men and women. Horticultural villages usually are small with low population density and open access to strategic resources. Age, gender, and personal trait determines how much respect people receive and how much support they get from others. Horticultural villages usually have headmen, rarely, if ever, headwomen. Traditionally, among the Yanomami, the only leadership position that has been that of village head, always a man. His authority, like that of foraging band's leader, is severely limited. If a headman wants something done, he must lead by example and persuasion. The headman lacks the right to issue order. He can only persuade and try to influence public opinion. The big man, almost always a man again, was an elaborate version of the village head, but with one significant difference. The big man had supporters in several villages. The big man thus was a regulator of regional political organization. A big man is capable of mobilizing their members from multiple villages within the same tribe. Pan-tribal sodalities could assemble a force to attack or retaliate against another tribe. Chiefdom. Chiefdom refers to a form of socio-political organization intermediate between the tribe and the state. In chiefdom, social relationships were based mainly on kinship, marriage, descent, age, generation, and gender, just as in band and tribes. However, although chiefdom were king-based, they featured different access to resources. Some people had more wealth, prestige, and power than others did, and a permanent political structure. Some societies had many attributes of chiefdoms but retained tribal feature. Some advanced chiefdom had many attributes of archaic state and thus are difficult to assign to either category. Recognizing this continuous change, some anthropologists speak of complex chiefdoms, which are almost states. Chiefdoms administers a clear-cut and permanent regional political system. Chiefdoms may include thousands of people living in many villages or hamlets. Regulation is carried out by the chief and his or her assistant who occupy political offices. An office is a permanent position which must be refilled when it is vacant by death or retirement. Because official vacancies are filled systematically, the political system, that is the chiefdom, endures across generation, thus ensures permanent political regulation. The flow of resources to and then from a central place is known chiefly redistribution, which offers economic advantages. If different parts of chiefdom specialized in particular products, chiefly redistribution made those products available to the entire society. This helps stimulate production beyond the basic subsistence level and provide a central storehouse for goods that might become scarce in times of famine. Social status in chiefdom was based on seniority or of descent. Polynesian chief kept extremely long genealogies. The status of chief was ascribed based on seniority of descent. Some chiefs, without writing, managed to trace their ancestry back dozens of generations. The status system of chiefdoms, as of states, were associated with the differential access to the resources. Some men and women had privileged access to power, prestige, and wealth. They controlled the strategic resources such as land and water. In this context of differential wealth and power, the chiefly type of status system didn't last very long. Chiefs would start acting like kings and try to erode kinship basis of the chiefdom. The creation of separate social strata is called stratification, and it emerged as a signified transition from chiefdom to state. State systems. The state is a form of socio-political organization based on a formal government structure and socio-economic stratification. This presence of stratification is one of the key distinguished features of the state. The influential sociologist Max Weber defined three related dimensions of social stratification: one, economic status; two, power; three, prestige. Um, in archaic state, for first time in human evolution, there were contrasts in wealth, power, and prestige between entire group and men and social strata of men and women. The superordinate higher or elite stratum had privileged access to valued resources. Access to those resources by members of the subordinate, lower, or underprivileged strata was limited by the privileged group. Modern states are autonomous political units with social strata and formal government. States tend to be large and populous, and certain status systems and subsystems and specialized functions are found in all the states. This includes the following: population control, fixing of boundaries, establishing of citizenship categories, and censusing; judiciary, law, legal procedure, and judges; enforcement, permanent military and political forces; and fiscal support, such as taxation. Population control. To keep the population of whom the government governs state conduct a census, a state demarcate boundaries of separate that state from other societies. Custom agents, migration officers, navies and coast guard patrol frontiers. State also regulate population through administrative subdivision. State often promote geographical mobility and resettlement, serving long-standing ties among people, land, and the king. Judiciary. All states have law based on precedent and legislative proclamation. Without writing, laws may be perceived as oral tradition. Crimes are are violations of legal code with specific type of punishment. To handle crime and dispute, all states have courts and judges. Enforcement. All states have agents of enforce judicial decisions, for example, to impose punishment and collect fines. Confinement requires jailers. If there is a death penalty, executioners are needed. Fiscal support. State needed financial and fiscal mechanism to support government officials and numerous other specialties. The state may require a certain area of produce specific things or ban certain activities in particular places. Social control. Social control refers to those fields of social system, belief, practice, and institution that are most actively involved in maintenance of any norm and regulation of conflict. Norms are cultural standards or guidelines that enable individual to distinguish between appropriate and inappropriate behavior. First of them, I'll be discussing hegemony and resistance. Antonio Gramsci developed the concept of hegemony for a stratified social order in which subordinates comply with domination by internalizing their ruler's value, accepting the naturalness of domination, and hegemony, the internalization of dominant ideology, is one way in which elites curb resistance and maintain power. James Scott used phrase public transcript and described open public interaction between the superordinate and subordinate, the outer shell of power relationship. He uses hidden transcript to describe the critique of power that proceeds out of sight of power holders. In public, the elite and the oppressed may observe the etiquette of power relationship. The dominant act like masters while the subordinate shows humility and differ. And such system, the strategies used by the subordinate are called weapon of the weak, and he gave the example of Maleficent, how they actually avoided religious taxes or tithe by giving less or using the nibbling strategy, and that was a small act of resistance. Shame and gossip. Gossip, which can lead to shame, sometimes is used when a direct or formal sanction is risky or impossible. We see, for example, the cases of Igbo woman. The shame and ridicule was used by women against the men, played a decisive role in protest and movement in southern Nigeria in 1929. During this 2 months war, at least 25,000 Igbo women joined protest against British officials, their agents, and their colonial policies, the policy which actually taxed these women in the market. They used a traditional practice of censoring and shaming men through all-night song and dance rituals called sitting on men. Thank you.